with free agency a month away, let's welcome in Will Brinson, host of the Pick Six podcast. So when we talk about Derek Carr, Will, what do you think the top landing spot for DC4 is going to be?
Yeah, I mean, it'll be interesting, Tommy, because you look at the different spots, right? Like the Jets would make sense potentially, but can you imagine Derek Carr playing in the New York media market? I mean, like, look, I'm blocked by the entire Carr family. I cannot possibly imagine what's going to happen with the reporter. Like, if Derek Carr is a bad game with the Jets, is the Carr family going to be able to handle that, et cetera, et cetera? It would certainly be a different atmosphere, but it would make sense, with some of the connections there. And then, of course, the Saints make a ton of sense, right? You have Dennis Allen, who is the head coach, who was Derek Carr's first coach, I believe, back when he was a rookie in 2014. That'll work. 2014, and when he would have been as a rookie, and he started playing him early. If you wanted to, you could also link him to Washington if things open up there. Jack Del Rio, still the defensive coordinator, was his coach when he had his best season, arguably an MVP candidate at one point. Certainly, going to be extremely popular, free agent, I think. But at the same time, remember, he had a contract that was reasonable, that these teams could have traded for, and they declined to trade for him. And he didn't want to be traded. He wanted to try to force the Raiders' hands. So, I mean, it's a little dicey as exactly how much money he'll get. I would guess, guess he gets Daniel Jones money. I don't know. Man. It might be a little tricky for Derek Carr out there.
Yeah, maybe for him, obviously, he's got, one or two extensions since he was a rookie there. So maybe he wants a best fit for a chance to get to the postseason. Let's move on to the champs. Will, Orlando Brown got tagged last year, but he headlines a free agent class for them. What do you think about Orlando Brown and where he goes?
Well, I mean, you saw him tweet and put it on a bleeping T-shirt, right? He said that afterwards, like 0 sacks, put it on a T-shirt. I believe he said at the podium and then tweeted it out after that. I mean, this is a guy who is among a pretty notable free agent class, as you can see on the screen right now. I mean, this is a lot of players who are really critical to what the Chiefs did, particularly the wide receiver position, then on the back end. Andrew Wiley, by the way, incredible Super Bowl performance. I mean, look, the Chiefs' offensive line deserves a ton of credit for them winning that game. I mean, they basically stonewalled the Eagles' pass rush in the second half. Some adjustments, of course, in Patrick Mahomes and how he got the ball out. But I mean, Mahomes, I believe, was sacked once, right? The only 2 sacks in the game were Jalen Hurts basically running out of bounds behind the line of scrimmage. So Orlando Brown, if he is not tagged again, and we'll see what happens, he is going to make a ton of money on the free agent market. And we saw before, he wasn't willing to negotiate with the Ravens as a right tackle. He wanted to be a left tackle. That's why they traded him to the Chiefs. And then with the Chiefs, he wanted to get premier money, and they couldn't work out a deal, so they had to tag him. Second tag is obviously expensive, but man, this is a really, really good player who would cash in big time in free agency if he were allowed to get there in actuality.
Yeah, so we saw the list there for the champs. The team that they beat not only lost their both coordinators to new jobs, but they also have a list of free agents here, and it's actually more than we saw with Kansas City. What do you anticipate the Philly situation is going to be like?
Man, that is a lot of guys. And I think some of these guys, though, you look at Fletcher Cox, you look at Jason Kelce, these are lifelong Eagles players who are very, very likely, I would think, to re-sign with Philadelphia if they return to football. Some of these other guys, Miles Sanders, may try and test things out in the open market. He had a really good run to close out the season in Philly and certainly in the postseason. It's just hard if you're a running back to get paid in free agency. And Dominican Sue, of course, just like Linval Joseph, both older defensive linemen. It's going to be hard to really, really cash in terms of free agency. But, some of the offensive linemen, Chauncey Gardner-Johnson, James Bradbury, despite the final play, the most notable play from the Super Bowl, I should say. Despite all that, those two guys with their performances after being acquired by Philadelphia either during the season or before the season, they're set to cash in really, really big too. But yeah, I think the mainstays, Fletcher Cox, Jason Kelce, Brandon Graham, maybe are likely to come back to Philadelphia, or at least pick. It's either Philly or die, or Philly or ride, I guess would be the.
Let me ask you about a couple of star running backs, Saquon Barkley and Josh Jacobs. Now, they may headline a running back free agent class, but they could also get tagged. They might also maybe rework a deal. I guess the question for you here, Brinson, is would you be surprised if either Barkley or Jacobs is not a Giant or Raider at the end of the day?
I would be surprised if Saquon is not a Giant. I think that you look at what the Giants did this season, and you see how well Daniel Jones and Saquon Barkley played under the new coaching staff. I think they're going to be interested in bringing and going back there. And I would expect that Daniel Jones is going to want to sign a contract with the Giants. And then in turn, I think you're going to end up having Saquon Barkley just simply get tagged because the running back tag is so cheap. Josh Jacobs, on the other hand, I would be pretty surprised if he's tagged. Remember, the Raiders declined to pick up his fifth-year option. It was actually and this new regime, this new coaching staff with Josh McDaniels. So they could have had him under contract for this coming year. We talked to him at the Super Bowl, and do you know it was interesting. I was like, did it make you mad they didn't pick up that fifth-year option? He goes, actually, I didn't really care. He's like, you know what really peed me off? I don't know if I'm allowed to say on HQ. Ticked me off, I'll say. You know what really peeved me off? Was them playing me in the preseason. He said he ran harder and harder because of that all throughout the year. I think he fully expects to be a free agent. And look, he's got some mileage on him, but he's a tough runner. A really nice dude. Really surprised by how much I like Josh Jacobs now. And I expect him to get a decent deal out there.
Yeah, Raider Nation even scratching its head there, Brinson, because you don't play a guy of his stature in the Hall of Fame game. You just don't. But he had a monster year. Another guy that had a pretty good year, Tony Pollard. Speaking of potential free agents, although he's hurt right now, Cowboys, Pollard, Dalton Schultz. What's the Dallas situation, you think, at the end of the day?
Yeah, it feels like it might be tough to tag a tight end twice. And if you're going to tag him the first time, you probably don't want to work out a deal to begin with. So I would imagine Dalton Schultz gets a bite of the apple in free agency and probably ends up with a pretty decent look from a team, given his production at that position, if he doesn't want to come back to Dallas. Of course, Kellen Moore, gone now, and so you have to decide, like, if you're as an offensive player, do you feel like your role will be the same as it was before? For Tony Pollard, I mean, like, I don't know where Tony Pollard's head's at. I don't know where his physically he's at either, obviously. But if he's healthy when he gets to free agency, I don't understand why you would come back to Dallas. It feels like a bad sports movie where they keep giving, like, Tony Pollard does all the work to get him to the goal line, and then they keep giving Zeke the ball at like the 5-yard line, and Jerry Jones was obsessed with feeding Zeke Elliott the football. 231 carries last year to Tony Pollard's 193, and you saw the numbers bear out just who was more effective, and it's not remotely close just how effective Tony Pollard was. So if he's healthy, and I think that's obviously a big if, given the time frame of the injury, he would be a very, very sought after free agent, given a lack of wear and tear, his explosiveness in the receiving game. I still think people will be intrigued by him, but teams are weird about injuries because you don't want to pay somebody who's hurt. I mean, it kind of makes a lot of sense, actually.
You mentioned Dalton Schultz getting tagged. Jesse Bates III did as well. Before I let you go here, Brinson, we're talking about Bates, guys like Poyer, the safety free agent market. What do you think that's going to be like?
Yeah, it's been kind of hit or miss for safeties out there, Tommy. And we've seen like years where we've had a really good safety class, and it just hasn't done a whole lot in terms of generating interest. But I mean, Jesse Bates is a former All-Pro, I believe, at least second-team All-Pro, who couldn't get a deal done with Cincy, is a very, very good player. And if for some reason they want to let him walk out the door, I think he would make a lot of money on the open market. Now, like I said, hit or miss with safety sometimes, just because the team needs and who's in that class and the safety class and varying factors like that. But I think, Jesse Bates, I think this is a player that a lot of teams would be interested in, and it would be foolish of Cincinnati to let him go, especially given how much of an impact he makes on that defense for Lou Anarumo.
Brinson, certainly appreciate it, man. Glad the voice is feeling a little bit better today. Check out the Pick Six podcast where Brinson and the Super Friends, Ryan Wilson and John Breach, went into depth on the hiring of Jonathan Gannon. And then every detail from the Super Bowl out in Glendale, Arizona between the Chiefs and Eagles. Make sure you scan that QR code and check them out on YouTube as well.
Do you want a sports network that delivers everything that matters about the game? The highlights, the picks, the instant analysis, no yelling, no fake debates, no politics. Hit the subscribe button and never miss a moment.